Hey, Andrew, as you know, I am applying for a job in Japan. If I am accepted, then I'm going to live here. Since you lived and worked in Japan for a couple of years, I was hoping that there might be some advice that you might be able to give me.
That is awesome news. I know you'll get the job. As far as advice, I would have to say there are a few cultural practices you will need to know. For example, Japan is a tight culture. Many unwritten rules govern behavior and people rely on these rules to make sense of situations. This formality permeates business culture in Japan. There are rituals for everything. The Japanese equate this formality with politeness. Engaging in the right behaviors at the right time conveys respect and ensures harmony. A great example is Meishi Koken, a formal exchange of business cards. This ritual has many elements designed to show respect for business partners and to convey your own prestige. Stand up and face the person you are exchanging cards with. Hold your card with both hands over your business card case. If your card is in Japanese and English, make sure the Japanese side is facing your partner so they can read it. Hold the corner of the business card, being careful not to cover your own name or corporate logo. This can be seen as being disrespectful to yourself or to your own organization. Next, bow. Bowing also has a complicated etiquette with varying levels of formality and postures that indicate one's social status in relation to your partner. This is consistent with the hierarchical nature of Japanese culture. Japanese business people are conscious of rank, which is defined by a number of dimensions including age, seniority, title, customer/vendor relationships, manager/subordinate relationships, and others. When it is time, hand your card to your partner with your right hand and receive your partner's card with your left hand. Carefully look at the card to show respect for your partner. The person with higher status should put the card away first. Putting a card away quickly shows disrespect because it says you do not recognize your partner's status. While Japanese are a hierarchical society, they are also collectivist in their decision-making. The Ringi system exemplifies this. In Japan, no one can make a decision on their own, no matter how inconsequential. Ringi is a formal process for reaching consensus on proposals, allowing all affected stakeholders to weigh in on a decision. In the Ringi system, a lower-level manager submits a proposal to his supervisor. Interestingly, a lower-level manager almost always submits proposals, even if the proposal is the senior manager's idea. The proposal is then circulated to all managers who would be affected by the decision. This group includes everyone from frontline managers to senior executives. These managers affix their personal seal, indicating if they accept or reject the proposal. If anyone disagrees, the manager who submitted the proposal must amend it and recirculate it. This process continues until the proposal is ultimately accepted or rejected. Having a proposal rejected is viewed as a serious mistake and will result in a long-lasting negative perception of the submitter. As you can imagine, the need for consensus and the formality of the Ringi process makes decision-making in Japan painfully slow. One cultural factor underlying the system is the Japanese fundamental aversion to risk. In the United States, if you make a mistake, it is possible to recover from it. Americans business people, while encouraged to learn from their mistakes, are rewarded for taking calculated risks that potentially lead to big rewards. In Japan, a single mistake can derail a manager's career. Therefore, Ringi system evolved to ensure that all parties are in agreement before deciding on a course of action. The Japanese believe that building this consensus minimizes the risk that a company will down the wrong path. If the decision does not work out, no one individual can be held accountable since all parties gave their support and consent. Therefore, Ringi system evolved to ensure that all parties are in agreement before deciding on a course of action. The Japanese believe that building this consensus minimizes the risk that a company will down the wrong path. If the decision does not work out, no one individual can be held accountable since all parties gave their support and consent. This aversion to risk plays out in other aspects of Japanese business practices. The Japanese will pass on good business opportunities if they perceive them to be even slightly risky, and will accept much higher prices if they believe a deal to be risk-free. Japanese buyers are highly risk-averse, putting sellers at a great disadvantage in negotiations. Another example is how Japanese view job responsibilities. Japanese workers seek to limit as much as possible the scope of their responsibilities. The narrower their responsibilities, the less chance they will be held accountable for a mistake. In the United States, managers often reward employees for taking stretch assignments or stepping up. In Japan, there is little reward for risk-taking, but the consequences of failure are dire. Therefore, A Japanese worker is unlikely to perform a task he believes to be outside his scope or, even worse, should be the responsibility of his supervisor. Since bringing forward a proposal that is rejected can have negative impacts on a manager's career, there is tremendous pressure to build agreement prior to beginning the Ringi process. To ensure acceptance, Japanese businesspeople engage in a less formal consensus-building process known as Nemawashi. Nemawashi literally means working around the roots and refers to the process of preparing a tree for transplantation. Prior to submitting a proposal, a manager will seek informal meetings with stakeholders to explain the proposal, accept feedback, and enlist support. By going through the process, the proposal is refined as various stakeholders' suggestions on reducing risk are incorporated. This both improves the quality of the proposal and minimizes risk that it will be rejected once the formal decision-making process starts. Because of this, Japan has a reputation of a slow decision process. However, they have the fastest execution of decisions due to this refined process. The Japanese demand a high level of quality. Indeed, modern quality methodologies such as the Six Sigma were heavily influenced by Japanese thinkers such as Kaoru Ishikawa and Genichi Taguchi. Japanese expect, and are willing to pay for, a high level of quality in both products and service. The Japanese concept of omotenashi is an example. Omotenashi involves anticipating and exceeding a customer's expectations. Japanese consumers and business people expect this level of service at all times. Failure to deliver is unthinkable.
Wow, this is a lot different from the United States. How come Japan is so full of unique cultural practices?
Well, it's because Japan is a country rich in history. In order to fully grasp this history, you have to comprehend the environment that shaped its inhabitants. Fun fact, did you know that Japan is a little smaller in size than California? Incredible, right? An entire country's worth of people crammed together on an island smaller than a single state. Not only that, but it was also surrounded by harsh waters and violent phenomenon. Japan is truly isolated, and that means Japanese people had to learn to be productive with a small margin of error. This can be seen in the way the country manages their resources. Americans are comfortable taking risks and making mistakes. We prefer to move quickly even if it means that there is the possibility of making a mistake or failure. But in Japan, failure could be a make or break situation.
Sure, it is a harsh start to civilization. But lots of countries have a bad start. If that alone is supposed to make Japan so different, I still don't understand why Japan's culture is so unique.
Well, I'm just getting started. The samurai created during feudal Japan was also extremely influential. Starting as a warrior class in the initial caste system, the samurai were valiant knights skilled in combat and devoted to proper conduct. Ironically, the general influence and rise of the samurai led to a centralized government, which in turn decreased the number of battles. Fearing that the new era would breed a weaker generation, samurai began to teach rigid structure, moral philosophies, and a principle of ethics that eventually became known as the Code of the Samurai. The collection of their practices set the foundation for viewing employer-employee relations as well as family life. During the classical period, dating back all the way to 550 CE when Koreans introduced Buddhism, and with it Chinese culture, Japan started to consciously study and adapt Chinese culture into Japan. Some effects of this are seen by Confucian values of moral cultivation of individuals and service and state, an increase in the practices of Buddhism, and the Chinese language inspiring the Japanese written word. Up until this time, only Japanese was spoken. The classical period is where a lot of influences were introduced to Japan. In many ways, this period is responsible for how the world sees Japan today. Many years after the samurais of the Edo period and the innovations of the classical period came the Meiji Restoration. Started in 1868, the Meiji Restoration was the final demise of the Tokugawa shogunate, an end to the military government. Furthermore, the Meiji Restoration was an era of major political, economic, and social change. The Meiji Restoration brought the modernization and westernization of the country. Leaders of the Restoration were mostly young samurai from feudal domains. Those men were concerned with the growing domestic problems and by other countries invading. These concerns made Japan more open to ideas from Western countries. This was big. For close to 200 years, Japan had been isolated with their own beliefs. The slogan of the Meiji era was, "Enrich the country, strengthen the army." These leaders wanted to create a nation-state equal with the Western powers. Thus Japanese culture started to change and become more Western while stressing the traditional values of the samurai and of social harmony. The combination made for a culture that was self-protective and team-oriented. Beyond politics and social norms, Japan's culture, like many others, has foundation in religion. As you may know, there is a strong history of Buddhism and Confucianism in Japan. However, Shintoism may be the most influential set of beliefs that appeared in Japan. It was the religion of the state until 1945. This religion still remains closely connected with the Japanese value system and people's way of thinking. Shintoism has 4 affirmations: keep tradition and the family, love of nature, ritual purity, and Matsuri. The latter is worshipping and honoring gods and ancient spirits. Another fun fact of Japan is that Shintoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism all have 4 pillars of practice that can be seen as closely related to the samurai code and therefore held in reverence. Ironically, 4 is considered an unlucky number and sometimes seen as an omen of death. I would try to avoid pronouncing the number during your interview.
Avoid saying 4. Got it. Thanks for all the help with the interview prep. I am glad I found out about all these nuances before the interview. Who knew something as small as a business card has huge implications?
Small by Western considerations, but hopefully now, you can see why a Japanese businessman takes the gesture so seriously. In essence, Japan has been ingrained through its rich history to value tradition, formality, and harmony because acting rashly or selfishly could lead to a mistake. Small mistakes can lead to large, and possibly tumultuous, ramifications. In a country where small mistakes had led to wars, food shortages, and ultimately death, teamwork and trust in repeating strategies were the only means to survive. You should also note that because of this same mentality, the gender gap will be more skewed. I know that it's unfair, but this culture has only relatively began to adopt women in the workplace. I really hope that you get the job, but the gender gap in Japan is severe and has much room for improvement. Despite the fact that 67% of women in Japan have a tertiary degree compared to 56% of men, men accounted for more than 18% of employment. It is no excuse, but their traditional views were that the female acts as caretaker of the home. Japan has recently been adopting more Western practices, but this is still an area of needed change.
Thanks, that is beyond a bummer to hear, but maybe my interview is a sign that things are moving in the right direction. I understand that the odds are not in my favor, but I still want to try my best to land this job. The salary is supposed to pay better than my current position, and I would love to live in Tokyo and learn even more about this wonderful culture. If I had to sum up what I learned, I would say Japan is big on collectivism and harmony. Both collectivism and harmony stem back to Japan's history in a couple of ways. First, their history shows a country always at war with itself. They seek harmony because those experiences of war were only holding them back. Second, it reflects their religious history as well. The Shinto religion is very optimistic. They believe that all living things have a spirit and therefore deserve respect. In this way, they are seeking harmony. Their emphasis on harmony relates to the saving face and risk aversion concepts that Andrew mentioned. The Japanese believe that each person has their role in society, and must play their part in order to work together and maintain harmony. Part of the reason that the Japanese are so risk-averse is so they don't embarrass themselves, or equally as bad, negatively affect someone else or their company. They emphasize teamwork and politeness, and it would be rare for an employee to openly disagree with an idea, in order to avoid friction. It is not uncommon for their communication style to be indirect, using subtle messages instead of direct comments, all in an attempt to avoid conflict and maintain harmony. Since their focus is on harmony, it is not surprising that the Japanese maintain a humane orientation. They believe in and thus want the best for other people and the collective nation as a whole. They are often loyal employees because of this collective pride. As in the age of the samurai, when one poor action negatively reflected upon your parents and you could no longer be seen as a true valiant son, this concept carried over to the business world as well. Employees always strive to do right by their employers. In order to bring honor to one's family, an employer, and even oneself, there is immense pressure in Japan to succeed. This makes me think of Japan as a masculine culture, similar to the United States. Specifically, both countries strive for excellence and perfection, and generally have a live-to-work attitude, and both have had primarily masculine leadership throughout their history. Even though Japan values collectivism, contrary to the United States' individualism, both countries have a strong sense of national pride producing similar results. Considering how employees view themselves with respect to others in the same organization, and society in general, is enough to have me in culture shock, and further highlights the differences between our two cultures. And yet, their process of Ringi, which generally includes many people throughout the tiers of an organization, just makes sense in the business world and for Japan's highly hierarchical society. Even more evident differences are in the concept of formality that Andrew highlighted earlier. The Japanese people place great importance on the levels within an organization and in society, always aware of the rank and role. Many promotions in Japan are based on who has the most seniority, and who has been there the longest. It is of the utmost importance to them to treat elders or superiors with respect, and at times even use different speech to address people with different levels of respect. Knowing that Japan is so risk-adverse and fearful of failure, of course they hold experience in high esteem. The more experience you have, the least likely you are to make a mistake. Since the United States is more prone to taking risks, they don't view experience the same way as Japan. This is why Japan maintaining a long-term perspective feels foreign. They supposedly would not emphasize short-term targets such as quarterly earnings as much as the United States would. Many Japanese companies invest heavily in R&D, emphasizing the importance of investing in the future, while leaning on lessons from the past. All things considered, I am grateful for this opportunity. This hasn't just been a business trip, but a learning experience as well. It might be bad luck to say it out loud, so I will just think it. I want this job. I want to move here and learn even more. I want to see sights and travel around the country. It would be great to see Andrew every day. But I need to stay calm and not raise my expectations. They may not call, they may not call, they may not call. Andrew, does everyone in Japan talk so robotically?
No, it is because the studio who made us dubbed us in English for American audiences.
Oh? How humorous. Ha ha.
Indeed.
Ha
Ha
ha.
ha.
Ha 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 ha.
Ha
Ha
ha.
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 ha. Ha
Ha
ha.
ha.
Ha
Ha
ha.
ha.